The gates of Hale Ranch had not opened for a stranger in 3 years. Nobody in Larkspur Valley remembered the sound of the hinges moving until the morning Cal Doyle walked up the long gravel drive with a canvas bag on one shoulder and boots that had clearly carried him farther than a single day's journey should allow. Marion Hale watched him from the second-floor window of the main house, a vase of fresh yellow roses forgotten in her hands. She had buried her father 4 months earlier, and since then, the ranch had been losing money the way a wound loses blood when nobody presses down on it. She needed hands that could work fences and gentle horses. She did not need a stranger with a gentleman's posture hiding under a laborer's shirt, and she certainly did not need the way her pulse jumped when he looked up and found her at the window as though he had known exactly where to look. What she got was a man who carried himself like he had once owned the ground beneath his boots, and a secret that would eventually pull the whole valley apart. Before the year was out, a debt older than Marion's own memory would come due. A fortune would surface from behind a false wall in her grandfather's study, and a love neither of them asked for would decide whether Hale Ranch and the both of them made it through the winter hole. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is traveling. Marion Hale had learned to read trouble the way other people read weather. A cloud on the horizon, a stranger on the road, a letter with a lawyer's seal. All of it meant the same thing now. Something was coming for the ranch, and she was the only one left standing between it and her family's land. So when Gideon, her foreman, knocked on the porch door and told her a man was waiting at the gate asking for work, her first instinct was to say no. Her second instinct, quieter and more honest, was to remember that the east pasture fence had been down for 2 weeks, and none of her 3 remaining hands could spare a day to fix it. She walked out to meet him with her father's old ledger tucked under one arm, more for the look of authority than anything written inside it, since most of the pages only recorded how much money the ranch no longer had. He was taller than she expected, and he stood at the gate without leaning on it, without shifting his weight the way tired travelers do. His clothes were plain, a canvas coat gone soft at the elbows, but his boots were good leather, well kept, the kind a working man saved for years to afford. "I heard in town you might need hands," he said. "I can mend fences, break a horse, and I don't ask for more than a fair wage and a place to sleep." "You heard wrong, if you heard I was hiring," Marion said. "I can't pay a full crew's wage." "I didn't ask for a full crew's wage." She studied him a moment longer than was polite. There was something in the way he held her gaze, steady and unhurried, that did not match a man who had walked in off the road with nothing. "What's your name?" "Cal Doyle." "And where are you from, Mr. Doyle?" "Nowhere that matters anymore." It was not an answer that should have satisfied her. She had spent 4 months turning away drifters and fortune hunters who smelled a widow's daughter running a ranch alone and thought that meant an easy mark. But something about the plainness of his refusal, the way he did not dress it up with a sad story to earn her sympathy, made her trust him more than she wanted to. "The east pasture fence is down," she said finally. "You fix that by sundown, you've got a job. You don't, you've got a meal and a road back to town." He nodded once, like the terms were exactly what he expected, and picked up his bag. By late afternoon, Marion found an excuse to ride out toward the east pasture, telling herself she only wanted to check on the cattle that had wandered through the broken line. She told herself that twice, in fact, which was usually a sign she was lying to herself the 3rd time she thought it. Cal had the fence half finished already, moving with an ease that did not belong to a man doing this kind of labor for the first time, but also did not belong to a man who had done it for years. He worked like someone remembering a skill, rather than repeating a habit. "You're fast," she said, reining her horse a few yards off. "I had a good teacher once." "Where was that?" He paused with the wire stretcher in his hand, and for a moment she thought he might actually answer her. Then he only said, "Somewhere I don't get to go back to," and returned to his work. Marion told herself she should press him further, that a woman alone, with a ranch to protect, could not afford to hire mysteries. But the sun was low and gold across the pasture, and the fence line was straighter than it had been in a year, and she found she did not have the heart to send him away over a question he clearly did not want to answer. "He is hiding something," she thought, as she turned her horse back toward the house. "And I am about to let him stay anyway." That night, over a supper of cornbread and stew that Gideon's wife had left warming on the stove, Marion sat across from Cal at the long kitchen table and watched him eat like a man who had gone without more than once in his life, but also like a man who remembered which fork to use first when there had been more than one. "You're not what you look like," she said, before she could stop herself. Cal set down his spoon. "Neither are you, Miss Hale. A woman running 400 acres alone isn't what most folks expect either." It was the first thing he had said all day that made her laugh, short and surprised, and he looked pleased with himself in a way that made her decide, against every warning her father had ever given her, that she would let him stay through the season. She did not yet know that the decision would change the shape of everything she thought she owned. Gideon Marsh had run cattle on Hale land for 30 years, first for Marion's grandfather, then her father, and now, uneasily, for Marion herself. He did not trust strangers, and he trusted this one less than most, because strangers who could not explain themselves were usually running from something, and things men ran from had a habit of catching up on land that could not afford more trouble. He watched Cal from the corral fence on the new man's second morning, arms crossed, chewing a piece of straw slowly, while Cal worked a young gelding that had thrown every rider who tried it since spring. The horse fought him for the first few minutes, the way it fought everyone. Then something shifted. Cal did not pull on the lead rope or raise his voice. He simply stood his ground, patient as stone, and let the animal circle him until it stopped circling on its own. "Where'd you learn that?" Gideon called out. "Watched a man do it once. Watched him for a long time, looks like." Cal did not answer that. He led the gelding to the water trough instead, and Gideon noted, the way he noted everything, that Cal's hands on the rope were careful, in a manner that spoke of expensive animals rather than working stock. A cowhand did not treat a horse like it was made of glass. A man who had grown up around horses worth more than a house did. Over the following days, the small staff of Hale Ranch began keeping a private tally of the things that did not add up about their new hired hand. The house cook, Nora, mentioned that he had thanked her for supper in a manner more suited to a dining room than a bunkhouse table. One of the younger hands swore he had seen Cal reading a book with no pictures on the cover, holding it the way a man holds something familiar, rather than something he is teaching himself. Gideon kept his own list longest of all. Cal never spoke of family. He never mentioned a hometown. He flinched, just barely, whenever anyone asked how he had come to be walking the road to Larkspur Valley with nothing but a canvas bag. "I don't like it," Gideon told Marion one evening, standing in the doorway of the ranch office, while she went over what remained of the accounts. "A man that is careful about what he doesn't say is usually hiding something worth finding." "Everyone on this ranch is hiding something, Gideon," Marion said without looking up. "You never told me why you left your last position before you came to work for my grandfather. That's different, is it?" Gideon did not have an answer for that, and Marion allowed herself a small, tired smile at having won the point, even though she privately agreed with every word of his warning. She had begun, without quite admitting it to herself, watching Cal the same way the rest of the staff did not, with suspicion exactly, but with a curiosity that would not leave her alone. She noticed he never went into town on his day off, the way the other hands did to drink and gossip. She noticed he spent his evenings walking the property line on foot rather than resting, as though he were studying the land rather than merely living on it. One evening, she found him standing at the edge of the old orchard, looking toward the ridge where the Hale land met the neighboring property that had sat abandoned for 2 generations, ever since a family called Doyle had lost it in circumstances nobody in the valley liked to discuss out loud anymore. The name struck her the moment she thought it, and she dismissed it just as quickly. Doyle was a common enough name. It meant nothing. That land used to belong to somebody, she said, coming to stand beside him. Before my grandfather's time, nobody talks much about how he came to own it. Something crossed Cal's face. There and gone so fast, she nearly missed it in the dying light. Land changes hands, he said. Doesn't always change hands fairly. You know something about it? I know most old land deals have a story nobody wants told at supper. He walked back toward the bunkhouse before she could ask him what he meant by that, and Marion stood alone at the orchard fence a long while, watching the ridge go dark, feeling for the first time that the ground beneath Hale Ranch might not be as solid as she had always believed. He knows something, she thought, and I think I am afraid to ask him what. The old library at Hale Ranch had not been properly cleaned since Marion's grandmother passed away, and dust rose in slow gold columns through the afternoon light when Marion finally forced herself to go through her grandfather's desk, searching for any paper that might explain where the ranch's money had actually gone. She found bills. She found unpaid notes from the bank in town, and tucked behind a false panel at the back of the bottom drawer, wrapped in a strip of old leather, she found a ledger that did not belong to her father's handwriting at all, but to a hand 2 generations older, cramped and careful, dated more than 60 years back. She carried it to the window seat and opened it with the same caution she might have used on a door she was not sure she wanted opened. The early pages recorded ordinary things: cattle sold, seed purchased, wages paid. But halfway through, the entries changed tone entirely. Her great-grandfather had written, in ink gone brown with age, about a card game that had gone late into a winter night, about a neighboring rancher named Doyle, who had wagered his eastern acreage against a debt he could not otherwise pay, and about a hand of cards that her great-grandfather admitted, in his own words, had not been won honestly. I have told myself for 30 years that a man who sits at a table with marked cards deserves what he loses. The entry read, I no longer believe it. The Doyle land should never have come to us, and I do not know how to give it back without giving up everything my son will one day inherit. Marion read the page 3 times before she understood what she was looking at. Her family's fortune, or what remained of it, was built in part on land taken by fraud from a family named Doyle. She thought of Cal standing at the orchard fence, looking toward that same ridge, saying, land does not always change hands. She thought of his hands on the wire stretcher, careful in a way that spoke of horses worth more than a house. She thought of his refusal to say where he was from, and the flinch he could not quite hide. It cannot be him, she told herself. It is too great a coincidence for one drifter to walk up my gate and turn out to be the grandson of the man my great-grandfather cheated. But even as she thought it, she knew ranches in valleys this small did not attract strangers by accident, nearly as often as people like to believe, and she closed the ledger with hands that were not quite steady. She did not confront him that night. She told herself she needed more proof, needed to be certain before she said something she could not take back. It was, she would later admit to herself, also a simple fear that if she asked and he answered honestly, she would lose the only capable hand on the ranch, just when she had begun, against every warning she had given herself, to look forward to seeing him at the supper table each evening. Instead, she locked the ledger in her own desk and went about her days as though nothing had changed, watching Cal Doyle with new eyes and an old, uneasy guilt that did not belong to her, but that she could not put down. If it is true, she thought one night, lying awake and listening to the wind move through the orchard, then everything I own by right was taken from someone else by wrong, and someone else may be sleeping 40 yards from my window, mending my fences, and I have no idea what he intends to do about it. The storm came in fast, off the western ridge on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of sudden mountain weather that gave no warning beyond a greenish light in the sky, and a wind that stripped leaves from the orchard trees in handfuls. Marion had been out checking the new foal in the far pasture and was caught a mile from the house when the rain turned to something closer to a wall of water. Cal found her there, soaked through, leading her horse by hand because the animal had spooked at the thunder and would not accept a rider. He did not ask questions. He simply took the reins from her, turned both horses toward the nearest shelter, and got her into the old hay barn, a quarter-mile short of the house, before the worst of the storm broke overhead. They stood just inside the wide barn doors, both of them dripping, while lightning turned the sky white in long flashes, and the horses shifted nervously in the dim light. "You didn't have to come looking for me," Marion said, wringing water from her sleeve. "I wasn't going to leave you out in that. Most hired hands wouldn't have known where to look. I've spent a fair amount of time learning this land," he said, and then, as though he heard how that sounded, added nothing further. They settled onto a stack of hay bales to wait out the worst of it, close enough that Marion could feel the warmth coming off him, despite the cold rain still dripping from both their clothes. The thunder rolled long and low, and in the quiet between claps, conversation came easier than it had in the 2 weeks since he arrived. "Tell me one true thing about yourself," Marion said. "Just one. I won't ask for more than that." Cal was quiet long enough that she thought he would refuse. Then he said, "I grew up around horses, like the ones you keep. Better bred, maybe. My father believed a man wasn't worth much if he couldn't sit a horse properly. So I learned before I learned much else. That's not the life of a drifter." "No," he admitted. "It isn't." "Then what happened?" "I lost the life I was raised for. All of it, in a single season. I've been finding my way back to something like it ever since. One ranch at a time." It was more than he had said in 2 weeks combined, and Marion heard beneath the careful words a grief he was not ready to name outright. She thought of the ledger locked in her desk, of the name Doyle written in her great-grandfather's guilty hand, and she wanted, more than she wanted almost anything, to ask him outright whether his family had once owned the land across the ridge. She did not ask. Instead she said, "I'm sorry. Whatever happened to you?" "You don't know what happened." "No, but I know what it looks like on a person, losing everything they were raised to expect. I've been wearing that look myself since my father died." Something eased in his face then, the careful guard he wore easing just slightly, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. The rain slowed outside, the horses settled, and Marion found herself leaning, without deciding to, close enough that when Cal turned his head, their faces were only a breath apart. Neither of them moved away. "Marion," he said, low, like her name cost him something to say, "there are things about me you don't know, things that might change how you see me, once you learn them. Then tell me." "Not yet, not until I'm certain telling you won't cost you the one thing I came here hoping to protect." She did not understand what he meant, not fully, but the storm had passed enough that the horses could safely be led back to the house, and the moment broke before either of them could close the last small distance between them. They rode back through a fine, settling mist in silence, and Marion spent that night lying awake, turning his words over and over, certain now that whatever he was protecting her from had everything to do with a card game 60 years gone and a name written in her great-grandfather's guilty hand. "He is trying to protect me," she thought, "from the truth his own family has every right to be angry about. I do not know yet whether that makes him the most honest man I have ever met, or the most dangerous." Marion's younger brother Jasper had been away at his uncle's cattle operation 2 counties over when Cal first arrived, and he returned in early autumn to find a stranger sleeping in the bunkhouse, eating at the family table on Sundays, and, in Jasper's own furious words, looking at his sister in a manner no hired hand had any right to. Jasper was 20, headstrong in the particular way of young men who had inherited their father's pride without yet earning his patience, and he confronted Cal in the yard on his second morning home, in front of half the ranch hands, demanding to know what right a drifter had to sit so easy in a dead man's house. I work for a wage, same as anyone here, Cal said evenly. I don't sit anywhere I haven't been invited. My sister invited you. My sister invites a lot of strays. Doesn't mean they belong. Jasper, Marion said sharply, coming out onto the porch. That is enough. But Jasper had already stepped closer, chin up. The way boys do when they have decided a fight is the only way to prove they are no longer boys. I want to know where you're from. I want to know your family name. And I want to know why a man who talks like you do, walks like you do, is content mending fences for wages that wouldn't keep a horse fed for a month. The yard had gone quiet. Every hand within earshot had stopped working to watch. Cal could have walked away. He could have said nothing, the way he had said nothing to every question put to him since he arrived. Instead, he looked at Jasper with something that was not quite pity and not quite respect, and said, "You want a fight because you're angry your father's gone and nobody left standing. Feels like enough to fill the space he left. I understand that better than you know, but I won't give you a fight over it, because fighting me won't bring him back, and it won't make your sister's ranch $1 more solvent than it already is." Jasper's fists had come up, without his quite meaning them to, the old instinct of a younger brother wanting an enemy he could actually strike. But something in Cal's voice, steady and without malice, took the heat out of the moment, before it could catch fire entirely. "You don't get to talk about my father," Jasper said, quieter now. "You're right. I don't. I'm sorry." The apology, simple and unguarded, seemed to disarm Jasper more thoroughly than any argument could have. He stood there a moment, fists still half raised, uncertain what to do with an opponent who refused to fight him. "Jasper," Marion said again, gently this time, coming down the porch steps. "Come inside. Let it be." Her brother let his hands drop. He shot Cal one last look, equal parts suspicion and something almost like reluctant respect, and followed his sister into the house without another word. That evening, once the ranch had settled into its usual quiet, Marion found Cal alone by the corral fence, watching the horses in the last of the light. "You could have told him something," she said. "Give him a name, a hometown, anything to satisfy him. Would it have satisfied him, or would it have started something neither of us could finish yet? You keep saying yet, as though there's a day coming when all of this gets explained." "There is," Cal said. "I promise you there is. I only need a little more time." "Time to do what?" He did not answer, and Marion did not press him, though the not asking cost her more than she let herself admit. Jasper's suspicion had planted something in her that even the storm and the barn and the almost kiss could not fully uproot. A growing certainty that whatever secret Cal Doyle carried was large enough to reshape everything she thought she owned, and that he was choosing, deliberately, to protect her from it a little longer. He is buying time, she thought, watching him in the dark. And I am letting him, because some part of me is not ready to know what happens when the clock runs out. Marion's Aunt Odette had lived in the small guest cottage at the edge of the property for as long as Marion could remember. A widow herself, quiet and precise in her habits, seen most days in dark, sensible clothing that had not changed style since her own husband's passing years before. The staff treated her with a gentle, careful respect, the kind reserved for someone thought too frail to trouble with hard decisions. It was Odette, more than anyone else on the ranch, who took a genuine liking to Cal, and the manner of that liking puzzled Marion from the start. Where Gideon watched him with suspicion, and Jasper with wounded pride, Odette treated Cal with something closer to recognition, as though she had been expecting a man exactly like him to arrive for some time. "You have good manners for a laborer," Marion overheard her tell him one afternoon, over tea on the cottage porch. "Someone raised you properly before life had other plans. You're kinder about it than most people would be, ma'am. I am old enough to know that circumstances change a person's clothes long before they change what's underneath them." Marion, standing just out of sight around the corner of the cottage, found herself listening longer than was proper, unsettled by how easily her aunt seemed to see through the same careful mystery that had taken Marion herself weeks to even begin questioning. Later, when Marion pressed her aunt gently over supper, asking why she seemed so at ease with a man nobody else on the ranch fully trusted, Odette only said, "I have kept my own secrets a long time, dear. I recognize the weight of carrying one when I see it on someone else's shoulders." It was an odd thing to say, and Marion filed it away the way she had begun filing away every odd thing anyone said lately, certain that the ranch was holding more than one hidden truth, and that they were all, slowly, working their way to the surface at once. She did not yet know how right she was. What Marion did not know, because Odette had guarded the truth as carefully as anyone in this story, was that her aunt had been selling pieces of the family's remaining silver and jewelry in the county seat for the better part of a year, quietly funding the gaps in the ranch accounts that Marion had spent so many sleepless nights trying to explain. Odette had done this, not from any great fortune of her own, but from the small collection of heirlooms left to her by her late husband, sold piece by piece to a discreet dealer 2 towns over, because she could not bear to watch her late brother's daughter lose the only home the girl had left. She had also done it, though she would not have admitted this even to herself in plain words, to keep hidden a debt her own late brother, Marion's father, had accumulated in his final years, gambling losses far larger than anyone in the family had ever suspected, losses that had done more to threaten Hale Ranch than any drought or bad season ever could. Odette carried that truth the way a person carries a stone in a coat pocket, aware of its weight with every step, but unwilling to set it down where her niece might see it and be crushed by the shape of her father's failures. It was this same instinct for quiet sacrifice, perhaps, that let her recognize something familiar in Cal, a man also carrying weight he had chosen not to set down in front of the people he was trying to protect. "You remind me of someone," she told him once, watching him work the horses from her porch chair. Someone who also believed that love meant carrying the hard truths alone, so the people around him did not have to. Did it work? For whoever that was? Odette considered the question a long moment. Not entirely, but I do not think he would have done it any differently, given the chance again. Cal said nothing to that, but something in his posture eased, as though he had been given permission for something he had not known he was seeking. There is more happening on this ranch than one stranger's secret. Marion thought that night, watching her aunt's cottage window go dark. We are all of us, protecting someone from a truth we are afraid will break them. The trouble that had been building quietly beneath Hale Ranch all season finally arrived in the shape of Vance Whitfield, a land developer from the capital with a silver-headed cane he did not need, and a smile that never once reached his eyes. He came up the drive in a car too clean for the dirt roads of Larkspur Valley, accompanied by a lawyer carrying a leather case, and he found Marion in the yard with dirt on her hands from the garden, which seemed to please him, as though her ordinary labor confirmed something he had already decided about her. "Miss Hale," he said, removing his hat with theatrical courtesy. "I imagine you know why I've come. I imagine I don't, since we've never met. Your father, before his passing, took a loan against this property from a company I now hold a controlling interest in. That loan is significantly past due. I'm prepared to be generous about the terms of foreclosure, given the circumstances, but generous does not mean indefinite." Marion felt the ground shift beneath her in a way no ledger entry, however grim, had prepared her for. "My father never mentioned any loan of that size." "Your father," Whitfield said, with the practiced sympathy of a man who has delivered bad news many times before, "was not always forthcoming about his debts, Miss Hale. I have documents. My lawyer can walk you through them at your convenience. I would suggest sooner rather than later. Interest accrues daily." He left the papers with her and departed as smoothly as he had arrived, and Marion stood alone in the yard for a long while afterward, staring at a stack of documents that seemed to threaten everything she had spent the last 4 months breaking herself trying to save. She found Cal that evening in the barn, and, for the first time since he had arrived, told him everything. The debt, the developer, the fear that had been sitting under her ribs since the moment Whitfield's car had come up the drive. Cal read through the document slowly, and something changed in his expression as he did, a hardening she had not seen in him before. "These signatures are wrong," he said finally. "Wrong how? Your father's signature here doesn't match the one on the deed I've seen filed at the county office, and this loan company Whitfield claims to control. I've heard that name before, and not in a way that inspires confidence. How would you know what my father's real signature looks like? How would you know anything about county filings or loan companies?" He set the papers down carefully, and for a long moment he simply looked at her, as though deciding, finally, that the time he had been buying since the day he arrived had run out. "Because I've been looking into this land, and the people who've held claims on it, for longer than I've been mending your fences, Marion. I came here for a reason that had nothing to do with looking for work. The work was only how I got close enough to see what was actually happening." Marion's chest went cold, though not, this time, from any tenderness. "What reason?" "I'll tell you," Cal said. "All of it. Tonight. But you should know before I do that, some of what I say is going to make you angry, and I am asking you, in advance, to let me finish before you decide what to do about it." She wanted to demand he speak immediately. She wanted to shout that she had trusted him with her land and her time, and, if she was honest, something close to her heart, and that he owed her the truth without conditions. Instead, because some part of her had known this moment was coming, since the night she read her great-grandfather's ledger, she only nodded and said, "Tonight then. I'll hold you to it. Whatever he tells me." She thought, walking back to the house with Whitfield's documents clutched too tightly in one hand. "It is going to change everything I thought I understood about this land, this ranch, and this man." Marion did not wait for evening. An hour after leaving Cal in the barn, unable to sit still with the weight of what he had promised to tell her, she went looking for him again, and found instead his belongings, laid out on his bunk while he was away helping Gideon with a fence repair on the far side of the property. She knew it was wrong to look. She told herself so, even as she was already lifting the corner of the canvas bag, already unfolding the papers tucked inside it. What she found stopped her cold, detailed survey maps of the entire ranch and the ridgeland beyond it, annotated in Cal's own careful hand, cross-referenced against old county records, and a family tree that traced, generation by generation, a line ending in a name she now recognized instantly. Doyle. There were letters, too, correspondence between Cal and a lawyer in the capital, discussing the original fraudulent card game, the forged transfer of the eastern acreage, and more chilling than either of those several exchanges concerning Vance Whitfield by name, describing him as a man known for buying up distressed land claims through manufactured debts and forged loan documents, precisely the kind of documents now sitting on Marion's own kitchen table. She understood, reading it, but Cal had not stumbled onto her ranch by accident, and had not stumbled onto Whitfield's scheme by accident either. He had been tracking Whitfield for months, following a trail that led directly through land his own family had lost 2 generations earlier, land that adjoined the ranch she had inherited from the very family who had taken it from him. She sat on the edge of his bunk for a long time, the papers heavy in her lap, feeling something complicated settle over her that was not quite betrayal and not quite relief. He had lied to her, not outright perhaps, but by every silence, every deflected question, every careful half-answer given across 2 months of shared suppers and near confessions in a rain-soaked barn. And yet, the maps were not the work of a man plotting to take her land by the same dishonest means his own family had lost it. They were the work of a man building a case, methodically, patiently, against Vance Whitfield, a case that, if she was reading the correspondence correctly, was meant to protect Hale Ranch from foreclosure, not seize it for himself. She found, tucked at the very back of the bag, a single folded letter addressed to no one, in Cal's own hand, that she suspected he had written and never sent, perhaps never intended to send at all. I came here looking for proof of what was taken from my family, and evidence to bring against a man who has ruined a dozen others the way he intends to ruin Marion. I did not expect to find someone I wanted to protect more than I wanted the truth. I do not know how to tell her that my name should have been enough to make her throw me off her land the day I arrived, and that I stayed silent because I was afraid the truth would cost me a chance at something I have not let myself want in a very long time. Marion refolded the letter carefully and set everything back exactly as she had found it, her hands unsteady, her understanding of the last 2 months rearranging itself entirely. He was never here to take anything from me, she thought. He was here to give something back, and somewhere along the way, without meaning to, he started trying to save me instead. She heard his footsteps outside the bunkhouse, and did not move from where she sat, the truth already spread open in her lap, waiting for him to find her there, and finish, at last, the story he had been circling for 2 months. The annual Hale Ranch Harvest Gala had been a tradition since Marion's grandmother's time, a single grand evening each autumn when the valley's families gathered in the main hall to celebrate a season survived. And this year, more than any before it, Marion needed the appearance of prosperity the gathering provided, even as she understood, better than anyone in the room, how fragile that appearance truly was. She wore her mother's grey gown for the occasion, the lace at the collar worn soft with age, and she stood near the entrance receiving guests with a composure that cost her more effort than anyone watching could have guessed. Cal stood near the far wall, in a borrowed dark coat that Odette had produced from somewhere without explanation, and even dressed as a guest rather than a hand. He carried himself with the same quiet authority Marion had noticed the very first day at the gate. They had spoken, finally and fully, 3 nights earlier, after she confronted him with the maps and the unsent letter. He had told her everything: his grandfather's ruin at her great-grandfather's card table, his family's slow decline into poverty and scattered obscurity, his own years spent building a legal case not for revenge, but for acknowledgement, and his discovery, only after arriving at Hale Ranch, that the man now threatening to foreclose on her was the very same Vance Whitfield who had already destroyed 2 other families, using forged debts across the county. "I should hate you," she had told him that night, "for the 80 years my family owes yours, and I should hate myself for the fact that I don't." "You don't owe me anything," he had answered. "I came here for proof against Whitfield. I stayed because somewhere in the middle of gathering it, I fell in love with the one thing I never expected to find on land. My family lost you." She had not answered him with words that night. She had answered him with a kiss that finally closed the distance the storm had left open weeks before, and it was that memory, more than the fear of the coming confrontation, that steadied her hands as Whitfield's car pulled up the gala drive uninvited, his lawyer trailing behind him with a fresh set of papers meant to be signed before witnesses, in front of the whole valley, to humiliate her into compliance. "Miss Hale," Whitfield announced, loudly enough for the room to hear, "I believe we have unfinished business regarding this property's outstanding debts." The hall went quiet, dozens of neighbors and old family friends turning to watch. Jasper stepped forward, fists already curling, but Marion caught his arm and held him back. "You have forged documents, Mr. Whitfield," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hall, "and I have proof of it." Whitfield's smile did not waver, though something behind his eyes went sharp and cold. "That's a serious accusation to make in front of witnesses, Miss Hale." "It's a serious accusation because it's true," Cal said, stepping forward from the crowd. "My name is Cal Doyle. My grandfather owned the Eastern Ridge land bordering this ranch before it was taken from him in a rigged card game 60 years ago, a fact this family has already acknowledged and made peace with. I've spent the last 8 months building a legal case against you, Mr. Whitfield, after watching you use the same forged debt scheme against 2 other families in this county. I have the original loan documents from the bank you claim to control. They do not match the ones you presented to Miss Hale. I have affidavits from the other families you ruined, and I have a lawyer in the capital ready to file all of it the moment I give the word." The room had gone utterly silent. Whitfield's lawyer had gone pale and was already, quietly, stepping back from his employer's side. "You have no standing to interfere in this transaction," Whitfield said, though the confidence had drained from his voice. "I have everything standing," Cal said, "because the land you're threatening to take borders the land your scheme already cost my family, and I will not watch you do to Marion Hale what men like you did to mine." For a long moment, nobody in the hall moved. Then, Whitfield, calculating swiftly and correctly that a room full of witnesses and a folder full of evidence left him no room to maneuver, gathered his lawyer with a sharp look and left the gala without another word, his silver-headed cane clicking hollow and diminished across the marble floor. The hall erupted into low, astonished conversation the moment the door closed behind him, but Marion barely heard it. She was looking at Cal, at the man who had walked up her gate 2 months earlier, asking for nothing more than a fair wage, and who had, without her ever fully realizing it, spent every day quietly working to save the very thing his own family had lost. "You could have told me all of this the first week," she said, when they finally stood apart from the crowd, near the same marble hallway where she had first watched him from the window. "I could have, but I didn't know yet whether I was here to reclaim something or to protect someone. It took me longer than I should have to understand it was always going to be both, and that they weren't in conflict the way I feared. And now? Now I know the land matters less to me than you do. I have enough evidence to see Whitfield answer for what he's done to every family he's ruined, including mine. What I don't have, and what I'm asking for, is a reason to stay on this ranch that has nothing to do with fences or wages." Marion looked at him for a long moment, at the man her great-grandfather's dishonesty had once tried to erase from this valley entirely, standing now in her family's front hall having just saved everything she had left. "Then stay," she said, "not as a hired hand, as whatever this has become between us." He kissed her there in the marble hallway, in front of half the valley, and if anyone thought it improper for a lady of the house to kiss a former ranch hand in public view, nobody in the room said so out loud. In the months that followed, Cal's legal case against Vance Whitfield resulted in his arrest and the return of falsified debts to 3 separate families across the county, Hale Ranch included. Marion and Cal, with Jasper's grudging blessing and Odette's quiet, satisfied approval, began the slow work of restoring both the ranch's finances and the disputed ridgeland, deciding together to run both properties as one, a single herd grazing land that had once divided 2 families and now, finally, joined them. Odette, for her part, never fully explained the extent of what she had sold to keep the ranch afloat during its hardest year, though Marion eventually pieced together enough of the truth to understand the sacrifice her aunt had quietly made, and to make sure, for the rest of Odette's life, that the older woman never had reason to sell another heirloom again. What Marion carried forward from that year, more than the ranch she managed to save or the love she had not expected to find at her own gate, was a simple understanding she tried, ever after, to pass on to her own children. That the truth, however long it is delayed, and however much it costs to finally speak, is almost always kinder in the end than the silence built to protect people from it. Secrets kept out of love still cost something. It is only a question of who pays, and when the bill finally comes due.